Max, please, I'm scared." Nayeli's thin fingers clenched her husband's wrist with such force that he hissed in pain. His wife's gray eyes were wide open, wide with fear, a primal terror of what almost all women had been through since the dawn of time. "You do not worry so much." With a soothing smile addressed to the woman and labor doctor, who, of course, with the panic of the future mom, faced not for the first time. "Now quickly take you to the hospital. We'll take you for a breezy ride. Everything will be fine." Max Nayeli didn't pay attention to the doctor. She was concentrating on her husband, clinging to him as if she could lose him if she let him go. Max even had a silly thought. Maybe she'd read his mind, but he dismissed it immediately. Then he released his hand from his wife's grip and patted her shoulder awkwardly in a comradely way. "Don't be afraid. It's just, well, give her some painkillers or something." Max couldn't stand it and turned to the ambulance, because right now his wife was making another long animal-like moan which made him cringe. "We are not sorry." With understanding female sympathy, because she herself gave birth to 3, looked at Natalia Doctor, the second specialist who arrived in the ambulance. But she herself said she had an allergic reaction to almost all known drugs. "Oh, poor thing. How unlucky. But in the hospital we'll definitely find something, definitely. You do not take offense." "Man," she shook her head. "But perhaps this is your firstborn and there will be no more. It is unlikely that she will agree to go through all this again. And you, father, don't force. Don't insist on your son." She finished. "The road is clear." Shouted the driver of the ambulance, who had previously furiously demanded from some unconscious car owner to move his car so that it would not block the exit from the yard. "Let's go." "So, Daddy, are you with us or what?" hurried Max Doctor, because she and her colleague unnaturally, with a woman in labor, were already in the gut of the ambulance, and without 5 minutes, father stomped outside. "You go, I'll catch up with you later." "I have to." Max was retreating to the entrance. "I forgot something I need there." Max, his wife, found some strength to lift her head. Her pale hand fluttered up, her fingers grasped for air. "Mishenka, I'm scared. Don't leave me. Don't leave me." Those words rang in his ears as Max ran up the stairs of the 5-story building to their apartment. In fact, that's exactly what he was about to do. Nayeli was a mind reader. Max looked out of the kitchen window. The ambulance drove out of the courtyard onto the road and disappeared into the evening stream of other cars. Max made his way to the only living room. A bedroom, a living room, and in the future it was to be a nursery. Except that he wasn't going to stand for it. And so, pulling a travel bag out of the closet, he began to throw his few belongings into it. That's it. He'd had enough. If to break with everything, then in one fell swoop, right now while there is, as they say, a head start, sweaters, a bag with documents about education, shaving accessories, warm winter pants, new socks. Still with the paper and other things, Max piled everything in a pile, and in his brain uninvited memories flashed by. How did it come to this? 7 years ago, he came to this city. No, it was even stronger. A simple country boy came to the big city, hoping for the same thing that many other similar people hoped for, to get ahead in the world, to get, it seemed to him, a naive young man who had just finished school and received a passport that just stretch out your hand and you will have everything you could wish for, because he should be lucky, right? And he can work with his hands. But it turned out that in the city, everything is different than in his dreams, and that no one here is going to give millions to a handyman, and in general, try to survive here. Max enrolled in vocational school and started working in automobiles. Theoretically, the business was promising, but in reality, after a year of training and part-time work, he realized where he was and where the good life, there was literally not enough money for anything. And in addition, as a decent son, he tried to send his parents money every month. At least a little, because they were already of age. Max became a late, first and only child. Max lived after vocational school in an apartment he rented in a bargain with the same simple guys. They lived peacefully. Sometimes, though, some of the neighbors were weird. There was, for example, Andre, who suddenly began to drink vodka. Then E stopped paying his share of the rent. Then began to carry things of friends to sell. And then Andre left, or rather, he was kicked out, and he was never heard from again. Then there was Vince. Oh, he was such a guy, broad-shouldered, russet-haired, eyes like cornflowers blue. Vince left once too, but for a different reason. He was moving in with a lady. Vasca, are you out of your mind? The fourth person in the apartment besides Max, a guy named Pete, asked him one day. She's almost a pensioner. It was about the lady who, as it turned out, had taken young Vince on as a full-time caretaker. She was about 50 years old. She looked like a well-groomed, glamorous businesswoman, but no one could understand how Vince had fallen so far as to sleep with her. What else am I supposed to do? Slave for pennies like you guys? No, I'm not judging, Vince said. Everyone has their own way of living, but she's got a house in a luxury village, an apartment in the city here. In Miami, 2 cars. She'll pay my tuition and, oh, well, you're now. Pete wanted to say something strong, but Max stopped him. Oh, leave him alone. If a man decides to live like that, let him live. He's not dragging us along with him. He could. Vince winked. You, Max, you're a promising prospect. And she's got a widow's girlfriend, a hot babe. Oh, much obliged. Max waved him off, and Pete twiddled his thumbs. Max and Pete went once, but they couldn't go any further. First, because Vince was getting calls from the same lady, telling him where he was, who he was with, what they were talking about, chirping to her about love, and answering to the nicknames Kotek, Baby, and My Chili. Secondly, it was somehow uncomfortable, like a friend treats, but in fact, it is clear that everything is paid for by an aunt who is old enough to be Vasca's mother. So little by little, they stopped communicating. With Nayli, Max met Benayli in a subway car. She was just sitting opposite, reading a book, and pale and touchingly sharp knees peeked out from under the hem of her dress. Girl, can I meet you? Max blurted and immediately blushed, because it was clear that this was the most banal, unfortunate, idiotic option. But the stranger with gray eyes and a scattering of freckles in the tone of fiery red thick braids suddenly smiled and said that it was possible to meet her, and it was love. Max, in spite of the fact that city life clicked on his nose in terms of romance, had not yet received such a harsh setting in place and therefore carelessly so succumbed to the new feeling. Greece was progressing rapidly, but it didn't end with a wedding. Because Max thought that in principle they were living quite well. What was the point of these conventions? No, at the dawn of the relationship, he did not think about their breakup, but it seemed to him that the formalities of marriage humiliate the very essence of love. After all, his own parents had lived all their lives just like that. As they say, as civil husband and wife, they decided to live, of course, in Nayli's apartment, and family life began. Max worked in a car service. The pay there was okay, but there wasn't enough money for anything, especially now that he had a family. And in that family, by the way, the more details began to emerge. No, Nayli didn't wake up one morning a completely different person, but it was like she was different. For example, if they argued over nothing, she no longer went to the first to make up. She waited for Max to make the first move. She was no longer trying to feed Max delicious food. May work too. And you're not armless. She justified and rebuked at the same time when Max came home to find a cold stove. It was true. Nayli worked. She was a librarian plus a part-time English translator. But Max couldn't understand. Why did his beloved used to have delicious food in the house, and now he eats about the same when he was a bachelor in their May? The family budget, by the way, was kept by Nayli. She carefully but unhesitatingly withdrew every penny of Max's paycheck, and then, grumbling a little that it was not a salary, but tears, returned it to him. For transportation to work, for pocket money. The last one particularly pissed him off. Was he asking if he was a first grader to be given pocket money for ice cream, or is he a man, a breadwinner? A man, a breadwinner, Nayli seemed to agree, but her tone was sometimes mocking. By the way, why don't you get promoted if you're such a good specialist? You know, normal people have plans for their lives. Oh, I have plans too, answered Max. And what are they? Well, to live. He didn't like to talk about all kinds of plans, because he thought that planning is convenient if you have millionaire parents, but it's hard for an ordinary person to look beyond tomorrow. Then Max's parents passed away. He went to the funeral, and when he came back, Naili asked, "Did you sell the house?" "No," he replied. "Why?" "Oh, because we need the money." His wife pressed her lips together so that they became a string and put her hands to her sides. "Why should I live like—" "Then you would have married an oligarch," Max interrupted and snapped at her. I don't understand you at all, to be honest. Do you realize what you've become?" "Oh, and what have I become?" Naili squinted unkindly, and then it started to happen. Max found out about himself that he was a wimp and other soft products, that he had no aspirations and was ready to sit in his swamp, peeking at cars and demanding the impossible from her. What impossible things he demanded, Max, by the way, never understood. Naili said that she thought he was promising that he would be a support, a protection. "Oh, you can't take care of your family." "What kind of family do we have?" Max raised his voice in her tone. "You and me, we don't even have children. We live like I don't know who. I can't take it anymore. Everything here. Maybe we'll split up. I won't be lost. And maybe you'll find someone better. We have children," Naili said quietly, on the verge of being heard. But Max didn't get it at once, and he asked twice. "I'm pregnant," she shouted. "How? When?" Max rounded his eyes and sat up. Lucky there was a stool, or he would have fallen to the floor. They usually use protection, but not always. Naili said they were safe days, and Max believed her. After all, she was a woman. She knew better. They had talked about children, of course, but somehow in her memory she had agreed that she had to get back on her feet first. Itis reminded her of all this right now. Naili cried. She said she knew he didn't want the baby. She said that she was almost 30 and old, and the baby, he needed it to save their family and to give them the motivation to do something, and that he would. Their baby would live. "I'm not arguing." Max shrugged his shoulders, and in his head as a hammer on the anvil, the thought was spinning. Now there will be no divorce, and time flowed when family life renewed, and the first time Max suddenly, unexpectedly, for himself, as inspired himself felt. "I will be a father," he thought, and in his brain drew pictures. As he and his son went fishing and on vacation, in the village, in his homeland. However, the term was still small and could not rule out a girl. Max thought that a girl is not so cool, but he could braid bows on her pigtails and buy her all sorts of soft toys and also feed her with sweets. He tried to work harder and took extra shifts. He began to look fondly at his wife, trying to notice all the special changes that happened to her. But then, other thoughts began to come to him. For instance, he found it hard to listen to Naili grumbling about money. "You said yourself that a child is motivating. And anyway, how much does he need? Even food for the first time is not necessary. And things, well, you can find out from acquaintances, Natasha?" Naili listened to all this, and then, for the first time in the whole marriage, she hit Max. She slapped him so hard that sparks flew from his eyes. And in shock he listened to a stream of words from his wife. That he wanted to send her and her child to the garbage dump and to the churchyard. That a normal husband and father is looking for a place to earn money, not a place to save money. That he apparently deliberately mocked her. Max apologized, admitted that apparently he had blundered foolishly and should not have been so. Only Naili did not want to forgive and in general pushed him out into the entrance. Meanwhile, it was November. Max sat under the door all night, and in the morning he went to work. He took a nap during the lunch break, somehow nestled in a corner. Then, when he came home, Naili let him in. Didn't say a word, just smiled wryly and called me in for dinner as if nothing had happened. That's when Max began to have dark thoughts, that a child is a long time, at least until the age of 18, and a bonus. His wife would be around. And how could Naili change during these years, if now she had become like this? She'd put on a lot of weight by the time she was 7 months, and she grumbled every day. Max even stopped paying attention to it, as if he'd adapted to the noise of the refrigerator. But to adapt is one thing, but to accept it is another. One day he was leaving work and suddenly, a step, ice, a fall, bam, a flash of pain in his ankle. Had to call a cab to the emergency room, and behind the wheel, me, Vince, you. Max's eyes widened because he hadn't expected to see him here. He grinned. "You didn't. And life, it's like that. That's how it turned out. It turned out that Vince hadn't been living with his businesswoman for a long time. At first, everything was fine. But then, anyway, she wanted a baby, but not with Vince. The gene pool, as she said, bad. It was decided to turn to a specialized clinic in the US, where the lady chose a donor, an athlete, an American, an excellent student with 2 diplomas. Like a dog, honestly. Vince grinned wryly. The surrogate was to carry the child. Vince had been told that yes, the child would know that he wasn't the father, or even a stepfather, because there was no formalized relationship with the lady. Vince was on full support, but Maldives and boutiques were getting on my nerves. My friend explained. You have everything you want, but you feel like a toy and worse. There, on this elite vacation, there were all sorts of businessmen, rich. I met a couple. We chatted with them. In general, they are also sick. They play in love and themselves, sick from the fact that they sell themselves. I realized how it all looked from the outside, how everything was inside. And I left. Imagine, she told me to return all the presents. What I came in, pants, t-shirt, sneakers with socks and underpants, that's what I still have. I didn't fulfill my part of the bargain. I wasn't with her till the end. Well, yes, Vince chuckled as he moved into another lane of cars. I guess I should have been with her until the end, I guess. You know how they say there are energy vampires. Well, mine was one of those. When I left, when I was alone, I was breathing in the air of freedom. It's so good. And how are you now? Max asked cautiously. It's all right, Vince shrugged. It's good. It's fine. My parents, of course, were shocked that I'd come home like that. But they took me in, didn't kick me out. Thank them. I went to school. I'm still a taxi driver, but soon I'll be a builder. And I met a girl, Vince finished dreamily, tenderly. We love each other. I've never once regretted breaking it. I just risked it all and didn't regret it. When he dropped Max off at the emergency room, he offered to pick him up and take him home for free. But Max declined, the pain in his leg having subsided. And the truth, by the way, it turned out to be not so terrible. The doctor said that a nerve was hit. The bruise was strong, but in general, everything was normal. They put a bandage on his leg and gave him a crutch. Max got home on his own, and from then on, Max never stopped thinking about it, how to get away from Nailai. He just realized that no, he couldn't bear it. Not after nearly 2 more decades of living next to her. He couldn't pretend that there was still something between them, and so he had to go. I'm a creep, Max said, when all the things were finally put into the bag, and the lock on the bag was fastened with such force that the tongue broke off. And Max called himself a creep, not for that, of course, but for what he was doing. He closed his eyes, inhaled and exhaled deeply, as if the thought that he could still stay, but he immediately banished it. No weakness. After all, Max thought, maybe he's not a complete creep, as people would say, because he's actually going to pay alimony. Well, how much is there supposed to be? He's gonna live on something, so he'll be able to nibble and send it to his wife. I mean, not his wife. Why would he support a grown woman? His daughter. Let Naili take care of her, and then circulation, and then let him find a man to be his daughter's father. A real good one. Yes, Max decided. He'll pay child support. If Naili decides to go through with the whole thing, he'll pay child support. If she doesn't pursue him with it, she'll just send him as much as possible. It was scary, sickening to admit to himself that by this act he, in fact, crossed out a part of his future. Max realized that in a good way. Well, for his daughter, he would be in the function of a purse, from which sometimes money comes and not a native person. But he also realized, no, he couldn't for the sake of even the little girl stay, because then he would have to live with her mother, and anything was better than this. Max, shaking himself like a wet dog, looked around the corridor and the kitchen and living room from the threshold with a distracted glance. It's time, and enough already, to think about all this. On him the wedge of light did not come down. Millions of children, grow up without fathers and quite happy, and therefore it is not only possible, but simply necessary, to cross out of his mind and heart all. And perhaps it is even worth looking for the pluses in all this. Yes, that's right. There will be no sleepless nights and endless childhood illnesses. There will not be all this fuss with studying at school, keeping an eye on the daughter's diary. There will be no need to grab for the heart when the obligatory teenage rebellion begins. No need to worry about who will break her heart when she falls in love for the first time. Outside, though the weather hadn't heralded it until half an hour ago, the rain began to drizzle. What's the popular saying, Max thought? Rain on the road is a good omen. So let him be lucky. Let him and his girls be lucky too. Almost 12 hours later, in the maternity hospital, in the arms of a new mother lay a baby girl. The nourished baby was sleeping, and the mother carefully stroked her chubby cheeks and charming upturned nose with her fingers. Everything will be all right, she said quietly. You're going to grow up happy, aren't you? And you will have an extraordinary, wonderful, the happiest destiny, won't you? And the little girl, who was decided to be called Angeli, suddenly opened her eyes, which even the doctors who delivered the baby were surprised by the unusually bright and pure blue color. Oh, it will be a beauty, said the nurse who brought the baby. Her eyes are as blue as cornflowers. She shook her head. My grandfather was a jeweler, so he said that some people have eyes that are sapphires in color. And do you know what that means? That they'll have an extraordinary life, a kind of life that'll take them on a whirlwind. And there, wherever it takes them. So, Mom, you should watch out for your daughter. She's going to be a tough character. And then time flew by, and now, since Angeli's birth, more than 16 years have passed. Max. The loud shout of the bosun made the new members of the crew pull their heads into their shoulders, preparing for a reprisal. But Max, having worked on the Albatross for 5 years, was used to it, so he didn't even turn around, because he knew that the bosun Mate was a formidable bear, and if you found an approach to him, he was more like a teddy bear. Tell me, I beg you, that it's not liver for dinner. The bosun, gripping the jam, the ship had been jerked again by the wave, peered into the kitchen. Homemade chicken cutlets with mushroom sauce. Max replied. There's mashed potatoes on the side. And there's dessert, he added, which almost made the bosun groan. I'll make apple pie. With ice cream. Max, you're a genius, said the bosun and walked away. He needed his help on deck in this weather. Fate had dealt Max a very peculiar fate. For several years, he literally wandered around. He worked in car dealerships or as a laborer. He sold his parents' house, but unsuccessfully. The realtor was a bastard, forced him to sell it for pennies, almost half of it for the commission. With the proceeds, he managed to buy a room in the apartment, remade from the former dormitory. But somehow Max did not take root there and went, as they call it, in free swimming. But at first only in a figurative sense, and then, suddenly, as a blow to the head and changed everything, realized that he wants to be a chef and entered a culinary school. He worked, as they call it, with fire. But he never aspired to the restaurant business, a factory canteen, a cafe at the highway, where truckers had a snack, a rest house, a balayashnaya. These were the places where Max worked, and then that very friend of his youth, Pete, informed about one curious vacancy. A cook was required on a small cargo ship, sailing somewhere in the region of India, the coast of Africa and Southeast Asia. The ship belonged to a businessman with Russian roots, and that's how Max found himself on the Albatross. The salary was not great, but decent, and most importantly, there was a sea of impressions, and here, the next one was coming right now. The ship got into a storm, about which forecasters forgot to warn. Otherwise, the captain would have changed the route. In general, Max was not afraid of storms. Everything in the kitchen was securely fixed. He had learned to cook everything regardless of the outrage. And fortunately, he had already fried cutlets. It remained only to grind mashed potatoes and to take the pie out of the oven. Hey, don't sink us, Poseidon, ma. Max muttered to himself under his nose a well-known saying on the ship, which came from the fact that the captain was a superstitious man, and in case, as he said, the whole ship was covered with various amulets, which had relations to many religions, including Poseidon. Max glimpsed that he should send word to Pete and find out how he was doing. Pete had never married. He lived as a bachelor, and his health had been failing him lately. And Pete, in those far-off days, became the man who, little by little, informed Max of what was going on in the family he had left behind. He told him, for example, that Nayeli was so angry that she decided not to write down the child's father at all, and even gave her daughter a patronymic not after Max, but after some singer of the 80s, Pete, by the way, gave Neely money for her daughter's maintenance. The woman accepted it condescendingly, and so it went on for quite a long time. And then, in general, Neely disappeared. No, not missing in action. But her distant relatives informed her that she had gone away, married abroad, and no longer needed your handouts, and there was no need to look for her. Something this time the storm is very much played out. It's outrageous. Leaving the pie to cool in the Ajar oven, Max went upstairs. Yes, that's right. The waves were not high but powerful. The whole deck was flooded. Max moved carefully. It was slippery under his feet. He took a deep breath and looked around. The elements were raging, but there was a charm to it. Max was about to go down, but then he couldn't believe his eyes because a wave was coming straight at the ship, a monstrously huge wave. It was unusual, just like a flat wall up to the sky. Someone else noticed it. There was a shout over the deck. People were given the command, "Down, get off the deck." Max also rushed to run, but his foot caught the rope. Had someone not put it away, or had they forgotten? Anyway, Max got tangled up. "Help, he shouted, but his voice was drowned in the roar of the wind. And then he froze. It was like instinctive. Why flounder if you didn't have time, you stupid, stupid man? A huge wave crashed on the ship, and the last thing Max felt was that he was picked up by the water, dragged and thrown somewhere. He did not see the sky. The ship, only water all around. Max woke up from the fact that the sun rays were dancing behind his eyelids, and without opening his eyes, without moving, he began to greedily gulp air. To breathe, he could breathe. Then consciousness, based on sensations, under his back was hard and dry, suggested that he must have crawled out of the sea and survived the storm. Max opened his eyes and blinked. "You alive?" An unfamiliar face leaned over him, blurred in a wide white-toothed smile. "Alive, thank you." Max said and coughed. His throat was sore, so he had drunk seawater and then torn his throat while they were pumping him out. "Nay, drink." The face, which belonged to a native African, frowned worriedly, and a cup of water was pushed into his chapped lips, and a mighty hand dived under his back, lifting him up and helping him to sit down. "Thank you," Max repeated, and drained the cup. Strangely enough, he was thirsty. Now he looked around. He was lying on a mat covered with a striped plaid in a hut through the woven walls and roof of which the sunlight was filtering in, playing with glare. Max had no clothes on except underwear, but the clothes were immediately found, folded neatly on a chair. It, besides the table and nightstand and a chest of the most ancient kind, represented the furnishings of the place. "Oh, you were wet. I washed and dried you," said the one who had rescued him, and smiled again. "May you see, Sebius. Where am I?" "Albatross, my ship. You are washed ashore. You were as dead as a fish." Shook his head at the stranger rescuer. "My name is Tommy." He slapped his chest. Max Smith," he said, and added, because the man across from him had narrowed his eyebrows in confusion. "It's just Max, or just Tommy. So, where am I? I need to get in touch. Coast Guard, the ship, it shouldn't have sunk." Max stood up and immediately fell back down. "You slept for 2 days," Tommy said. I'm very grateful. "Can I use your phone?" "Nope," Tommy answered and began to curl his fingers. "No phone, no internet, no electricity, no car. The Red Lion won't let me?" His head ached. His stomach felt oddly twisted. He still wanted to sleep. Max didn't think straight, but he managed to draw some conclusions from Tommy's further speech. He vaguely remembered that he had grasped a piece of wood in the sea and so had been able to stay on the surface, and that he had clung to it and had been dragged along by the current in a semi-conscious state, and then he had been thrown ashore somewhere not far from the reserve and far away from the big cities. But there was a settlement nearby, and one of its inhabitants, Tommy, discovered him, and it was not an ordinary village. Apparently, its inhabitants worshipped some red lion. Max was not strong in the beliefs of the African continent, but he realized that it was better to be careful not to hurt anyone's feelings, because judging by the way his new friend every time folded his fingers into strange signs at the mention of the Red Lion, they took it very seriously. Tommy said it was more than 2 days' journey to the nearest town with civilization, that is, telephone and police. And it would have to be done on foot or on horseback, on mules, because the locals don't keep cars. But there was good news. Tommy said that since Max had urgent business, he would certainly be a guide for him. And besides, he had to go into town himself. It turned out that Tommy didn't live here permanently. His parents lived in this settlement, his favorite girl, and he himself. He was studying to be a programmer at the university, and he had to go to get money because he didn't like to use cards and preferred cash. So you have a cult here, Max said cautiously. Don't say that in front of other people, Tommy said, jokingly wagging his finger at him. My parents, for instance, might be offended. They put you in the guest house. I took care of you and I'll keep helping you, and you're a cult. No, it's more like a society with its own peculiarities. But personally, if you're interested, I don't really share them. Tommy winked. Tommy said they could leave tonight in the cold. Max agreed, without mentioning the fact that he had never ridden a horse in his life. What was so hard about it? The mule, however, sensed in his gut the inexperience of the rider, and from the very beginning, he was throwing out numbers. He stood up stubbornly, jumped up, tried to bite. Tommy laughed. Max politely clenched his teeth, but they got up for the night when the sky was already studded with stars and the thin sickle of the moon had risen. In the distance, animals were making heart-rending sounds, and Tommy, tossing branches into the fire, explained that they were hyenas. Max shuddered and asked, "Are there any weapons against them?" "No." The guide answered proudly and explained that, firstly, hyenas rarely leave the boundaries of the reserve, and secondly, this territory is under the patronage of the Red Lion, which means that members of his community are not afraid of anything. Max thought that actually they were a bit like a sect with all their prohibitions and so on. But again, he kept silent. They had supper and Max was pleasantly surprised. Tommy had brought not only a wok, but also cans of tinned meat and wheat groats, and soon the chowder was ready. They went to bed on the ground, on the same stiff mats. They got up before dawn and went on their way. Max doused himself with water and by noon had emptied his entire water supply. Tommy shared some, but grumpily reminded him to be more frugal. "That's it. I'm done," Max reported. They had just climbed another hill and the view was spectacular. But Max wasn't staring at the beauty of nature. He was staring at something else. "Oh, I'm hallucinating. It must be sunstroke," he said sadly, because down there, near the thin ribbon of the rivulet and among the greenery, he saw a white house surrounded by a garden. Tommy, who came up to him, again made the sign with his hand and said that it was not a hallucination. Then Max said, "Shall we ask them to make a phone call? Or no?" Tommy pressed his lips together. "We can't." Why not? Alex Gray lives there." Tommy answered and looked at Max as if he were an idiot who didn't understand the obvious. "And who is that? Why can't he help us?" Max was stubborn, who didn't feel like kicking ass on a mule ride for hours to come. "No one dares disturb Mr. Gray," said Tommy. "Huh? Max stretched out confused. Tommy, sighing, repeated that Mr. Gray was a respectable man. He was a rich man. He didn't like uninvited guests. He wanted to live privately with his girlfriend and his ward. And then Max was struck by lightning. He simply froze when he heard the names of the wife and daughter of the mysterious Mr. Gray. "Say that again," he said to Tommy. "Who does he live with?" "Oh, that's a beautiful story." Tommy broke out into his usual smile. "Hey, I'll tell it." And he said that Alex Gray lived alone for a long time. He had many girlfriends, but then he went away for a long time and came back with a woman from a far country where there is a lot of snow, and he brought with him one who goes by the name of Nairi and her daughter, whose name is Angeli. Tommy, rolling his eyes, added that the beautiful mistress, Nai, had suffered from the treachery of a cruel man who had not accepted the great gift of heaven to become a father and had abandoned her and the newborn baby. May he be gnawed by a lion, trampled by a rhinoceros, and eaten by a crocodile. Tommy finished with feeling and spat into the road dust. "So, are we going on?" He hurried Max on, but he was gripping the mule's reins so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Is it possible?" In describing Miss Nailai, Tommy had mentioned that her hair was a fiery color and she had a beautiful mole, exactly on her left temple, like a moon, and Max thought, "It's not a coincidence, is it?" Is it possible that after all these years, he was unbelievably washed ashore by a storm not far from where the woman he had once left behind now lived with his daughter? Yes, he had abandoned her, them, torn from his heart for so many years, but that storm, it changed something in him, and now Max felt, perceived, and saw everything differently. And this coincidence, he suddenly realized it was a sign. He must see his girls, all the more so that his Naili is not alone. She's living with another man. Tommy calls Angeli his ward. Why is it so unbearable to hear that? Who is this Mr. Alex Gray? How was Tommy supposed to get it all out? Max didn't bother to tell him the truth, that he was the man who was to become intimately acquainted with African fauna. Instead, amazed at his own eloquence and imagination, he began to say that Naili was an old acquaintance of his, and that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and the fact that he had been lucky enough to be rescued by Tommy was nothing but a sign that fate itself favored his seeing her. So to speak, to pay his respects, to pass on tidings from common other acquaintances. Tommy listened to all this with an impenetrable face. He chewed his lips thoughtfully. Good, he said. You're a stranger. I'll personally go down and talk. And if Alex Gray agrees to take you in, then that's the way it is. But if not, we'll move on. Okay, but first, Tommy rushed off and started to take something out of his saddlebag. Oh, I need to talk to the spirits and ask for their blessing. I'll go over there. Tommy waved his hand at some boulders near where there was a stunted grove and more hills. I'll talk to the spirits. I'll be gone a long time. 3 hours you sit under a tree, there's shade, and don't drink all our water. Have a nice chat there. Max shouted after him. Naturally, he was not going to wait for some man, apparently a local oligarch, to give him permission to meet with Naili. No way. So after waiting until Tommy disappeared among the trees, Max tied the mules in the shade under a tree and started down the hill. In fact, he had no definite plan. He simply acted spontaneously, on emotion, intuitively. Down the hill, of course, was easier, but he was still out of breath. Max turned his head. It seemed to him that with such a big house, or rather, with the whole estate, there should be a lot of people working. But so far, at first glance, no one had met him, and it was even strange. From the height of the hill, Max realized a little. The house and the adjoining garden were surrounded by a solid wrought iron fence. But on one side, the territory was covered with greenery. There, it seemed, began something like extensive orchards, and Max thought that maybe there he could somehow get through the fence unnoticed. Maybe there was a hole or he could pull the bars up. Breathing immediately became easier as he stepped into the shade of the trees. How fresh. It looked like they hadn't skimped on watering. The leaves were still glistening with droplets. Max crept and listened. What if they catch him? But then he would surely be taken to the owners of the house, and there he would say what? He'd never gotten this far in his plans. The main thing was that his girls lived here. In general, Max surprised himself how much he wanted to know, to see how they lived here. Yes, in the past he had done something wrong, but by the way, he remembered that he had heard about such things, extreme situations, shocking experiences. They like to shift something in a person's mind, and he on their background rethinks the previous life and system of values. Max did not engage now in deep introspection, but he realized that he was doing what he had to do, what his heart told him to do. And here was the fence, a good fence, strong, however. There was a gate here, apparently just for the workers, and it was open. Max pulled the sash and jumped. There were voices behind him. He jumped, took cover behind a tree, and cautiously squinted. Yes, workers. 2 girls walking. They were talking, laughing, holding baskets full of fruit. They spoke in the local language, so he didn't understand a word. But the main thing was that when they entered the mansion, they didn't lock the gate behind them. Probably they were going to come back again. Max waited for them to leave and followed them. He had no time to admire the garden, but he noted that it was not an easy place. Emerald green English lawns, shapely trimmed bushes, fountains, rose bushes, some sculptures. Exactly. This Alex, the rich man. A couple of times Max almost ran into people, and judging by the identical uniforms, they were servants, but he hid somewhere in time, and then he was just sitting behind a rose bush as suddenly heard voices. One, deep, Velvet male, the second young female. Max choked on the air. The voice could belong to young Nelly, but he cautiously looked out and rounded his eyes. It was his daughter. There could be no mistake, because it wasn't just the voice that was similar, the same red hair. He remembered that Nelly hated the way it curled, so she carefully straightened the unruly curls. The one in front of him had red hair cascading down to her shoulders. Same freckles, same straight nose, only this one wrinkled it and frowned. And all of it, no doubt, betrayed anger like her mother's. "Pull yourself together, doll." A mocking male voice cut Nick's ears with this familiar doll. How dare this man address his 16-year-old girl like that? So that's the best you can do. The red-haired teenage girl, emitting something between a Viking battle roar and the howl of a wild cat, rushed forward and Max went cold. He only now noticed the knife in her hand. No, it wasn't even a knife. It was a long, curved dagger as long as her forearm, suggesting that it must have been taken straight from a museum. Max could directly see the owner of the male voice as well. He was a tall brunette, about 30 years old, dressed in khaki pants and a black t-shirt. Powerful muscles, pumped up. No wonder he easily knocked the dagger out of the redhead's hands, then toppled her to the ground with his knee on her stomach and pressed the point against the girl's slender knuckles. "Dead," he announced with a broad grin. "I think it's too early for us to practice with this." No. The girl struggled beneath him, trying to break free of his grip, but only writhing painfully. "I can do it." "Oh yeah. Who's gonna sew you up?" I said no. "But you should come to the shooting range more often. You're definitely making progress there." It seemed to calm her down because she relaxed under him and nodded. The brunette stood up, held out his hand, and the redhead grasped it, standing up with the grace of a dancer in a smooth, fluid motion. "Oh, that's enough for today. And it's getting hot," said the brunette. "I'm coming." The girl sighed and began to twist her hair into a ponytail, taking the rubber band off her wrist. "Now, I want to make a bouquet of white roses. Mom will love it." The brunette, nodding, turned around and in a minute disappeared into the house. Max got nervous. What to do? Get out and talk right now, or wait and maybe go around the house and try to find Nelly. But when he, having decided that the second option was better, threw a glance where the girl had stood a moment earlier, she was no longer there. As vaporized, Max began to back up carefully, and then he wheezed, waved his arms and legs in the air, because his neck was clenched so that the colorful circles danced in front of his eyes. "Hey, Alex." A high-pitched voice of the redhead sounded above his ear. "Hey, Alex, there is a stranger here." So this man, as if descended from the poster of a Hollywood blockbuster action movie, is the mysterious Mr. Gray, thought Max, fading consciousness because, as he realized, his own daughter was going to finally strangle him. "Else, Angie," he wheezed, collapsing. But then her grip on him loosened, and he fell face first into the grass, coughing and gasping for air. "Angeli." Max rolled over onto his back with difficulty. Nelly's red-haired younger counterpart was already standing behind Alex Gray, who was looking very serious and aiming a firearm at Max's chest. "Who are you working for?" "Or, I don't," Max tried to explain. "The name of your employer." "Now." Gray shouted, and a piece of green grass with a pinch of earth flew from the lawn near Max's head into the air with a deafening sound. "I don't work for anybody." Max stammered, realizing that this was a bad thing. "I swear, I got caught in a storm. I'm a cook on a ship. I was just looking for my daughter and my wife." The last word was out of his mouth before he realized its meaning. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity, but there was a strange expression in Alex's eyes. "Angie, go inside." "Oh, but," I said, "get in the house." The young girl, blinking often, began to back away. "But he said It doesn't matter what he said." Alex gritted his teeth with steel. "Valentine could have sent him, or Salvatore, or anyone. But I'm not going to brainwash you, so get inside." Angela bit her lip. She was clearly hesitating. "Max." Everyone turned their heads toward the house, where a new character had appeared on the veranda. Max opened his eyes. This was a new shock to him, because Nelly was in a wheelchair. "Oh, will someone explain to me what's going on?" Anjali exclaimed. Max finally got to his feet. He looked at her, and he didn't know what to say. Damn it," Alex gritted his teeth behind him. The gun disappeared behind his belt. "Mom," that man Anjali walked over to Nayeli. He said, "Yes, daughter." Nayeli's eyes glistened with tears. "Max, but how?" "Anjali, sweetheart, it's your father, and he's alive." "What?" Anjali transferred a shocked look between Max, Alex, and Nayeli. But you told me he was dead." She turned angrily to Nayeli. "What?" Now it was Max's turn to be amazed. "What did you tell her?" "Oh, what was I supposed to do?" Nayeli raised her head and her red, bob-cut hair swept up. "You disappeared. Like you were dead. And now, what? It didn't escape Max how quickly her mood shifted, from surprise and yes, he didn't realize it, fragile joy to this irritation that seemed to mask the other feeling she was holding back. "Oh, I think we'd better go inside," Alex sighed.
"Mom, how could you?" Anjali sobbed, her lips curling. "And you," she threw to Alex and then rushed across the terrace into the house. Somewhere in its depths, a door slammed.
Alex squinted his eyes and said something curtly to the servant, who looked out of the house at the noise. He nodded and disappeared. "Let's go," Alex said to Max, and he went. Because it looked like there was a lot to talk about right now. There was, and he had no intention of avoiding it, though he could neither plan nor predict where this conversation would go. The house was greeted by shadows and a deafeningly refreshing coolness. The air conditioners were running full blast. The small group entered the living room, furnished to match the first impressions of the house from the outside. Luxurious, dark wood, cream leather, decorations related to African traditional arts. Nayeli could operate the chair by herself. The chair, Max noticed, had a digital remote control built into it. "So I'm waiting for an explanation," Alex said. Walking to the minibar, he opened one of the decanters and generously poured some golden liquid into his glass. Then, after thinking, he poured it into a second glass and handed it to Max. He named some plant and explained that it was its sap, not alcohol, though the taste might remotely resemble ale. Max had never tasted ale in his life, but he refused. First of all, he had no appetite to drink it here. Secondly, he realized that it was a stupid idea, and if this guy wanted to harm him, he would do it easily. Who would stop him? But the thought flashed through his mind that he might as well poison him. Max spoke. He told how he had been washed overboard, how he had woken up and how Tommy had accompanied him to town, how he had accidentally found out that his Nayeli and daughter were nearby. "You want me to believe that you just happened to be here and suddenly have feelings for people you haven't cared about in years?" Alex asked sarcastically. "I'm telling the truth," Max said. "I just don't have anything to prove it." Why not?" Alex said thoughtfully. In less than an hour, I'll know if there really is such a ship, Albatross, and if you are among its crew. And by your fingerprints, I'll be able to find out if you are really who you say you are." Max rounded his eyes. He wasn't going to give his fingerprints to this guy in any way. What the hell kind of conversation is this? Alex understood his expression partly correctly because he grinned and waved his hand in a soothing way. "Relax. I don't need your fingerprints. The house security system has built-in facial recognition. But how you got in here," he added, taking a sip from his glass. "I guess I'll have to have a serious talk with the staff and put the garden under guard for the future, as long as there are people walking around." "Good." Gray put the glass on the coffee table with a clatter and came closer, looking into Max's eyes, for which he had to lift his head. By the way, Alex was much taller. "Suppose you're telling the truth. What do you want? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused?" Alex turned to Nayeli, rather stiffly and suddenly. "I'm sorry," she whispered and wiped away her tears with trembling fingers. I didn't think so. I told her it was a bad idea, that one day she'd find out you were lying to her. I was such an idiot for falling for it." Max sighed. So Nayeli had raised her daughter with the lie that her father wasn't alive. It was partly understandable, though, but on the other hand, it was. "I handed over the money," he said, as if justifying and reproaching at the same time. "What's in it for me?" Nayeli snorted. Alex had already brought her a glass of water. "You just disappeared. You didn't visit once. You didn't know how we lived at all, did you? If you knew what we went through," said Nayeli, And then she started talking about how painful it was at first, how she fought for a better life for her daughter, how happy she was that she and Anjali were living in their own little world. And then the car accident, the doctor's dreadful prognosis. Nayeli wasn't supposed to be able to move a finger. Anjali was supposed to go blind and stop walking too. But there was a charity. It was such a miracle. The mysterious benefactor transferred money for Anjali's treatment on the spot, and Nayeli had to go to Germany for the operation. And even if she didn't recover completely, it was already progress. And still, of course, she was scared because she was afraid of not being a full-fledged mother for Anjali with her disability. But again, fate smiled. In Germany, Nayeli met Alex. He was also a patient of this multidisciplinary clinic, but he just came for a routine checkup. Because he was cured a long time ago, love broke out between them. And he didn't care that Nayeli was now a lifelong invalid. He accepted her. He loved Anjali like his own daughter. Anjali was only 8 years old at the time, and she accepted her stepfather into her life. Alex, according to Nayeli, was engaged in various businesses, and for the last 2 years they lived here, in Africa, where he, in particular, led several charitable projects. So you're married, Max said. In general, he didn't notice either Alex or Nayeli wearing wedding rings, but he also thought that perhaps not everyone wore them. We're not married, Nayeli said, and for some reason looked away. Our relationship, it's not what one would think. Max swallowed hard. That sounded weird, very strange. She and I aren't sleeping together, Alex said, fixing his gaze on him. And there was never any reason between us. But how then? Max didn't understand anything at all. Because he didn't understand why a strange man would help a woman, and not just help her, but actually put her next to him and start raising her daughter. Alex apparently was exceptionally perceptive, because he again, almost guessing the thoughts of his uninvited guest, added, people can be bound by relationships more, deeper and stronger than banal attraction or romantic delusions. But that may be hard for you to understand. Well, I'll try to understand, Max replied. You may. Alex. Nayeli suddenly addressed the owner of the house, and from this soft personal address to another man, who was not even a lover, Max felt sick. And can he stay with us? Just for a little while. Really? Gray raised an eyebrow. I thought he was in a hurry to get back on board. I don't even know how the albatross weathered the storm, Max replied. But I don't want to inconvenience you at all. And W-8-A-2-N-T. He's staying. Like a rabbit out of a magician's hat, Anjali appeared in the living room. The girl's eyes were red, but she was definitely not going to cry anymore. I want to talk to him, she said with pressure. About everything. Oh, doll, I don't think. Alex started, but the young woman interrupted him. Be please. As a favor in honor of my future birthday, she added, and Alex choked. You promised that I could choose any gift. Okay, Gray said. A couple of days will be enough, right? Anjali nodded and smiled, which made her cheeks dimple. And now, young lady, Alex grinned. I think you should have a French lesson on the schedule, right? But, The girl started, but meeting the steely gaze of her patron, she stopped, nodded, and throwing a poorly readable, but at the same time obviously curious look at Max, disappeared again into the depths of that. Alex took a silver bell from the coffee table, and Max almost snorted. It was a hackneyed cliche from the movies about aristocrats, about how they called the servants. And indeed, a woman showed up. She was obviously from the neighborhood, and Alex said she would show Max to his guest room. He followed her. First of all, he needed to digest what had happened before he could talk to Nayeli or his daughter. And secondly, Max was literally falling off his feet. It seemed vital for him to get some sleep. Bonus thoughts of how and where was Tommy. Perhaps he was scared or even thought Max had been dragged away by hyenas when he noticed his But Tommy was also going to talk to this most unpersuasive Mr. Gray, and accordingly, he was not to remain long in the dark as to Max's fate. Now that the first emotions had subsided, Max was no longer sure that he had done the right thing. To think of it, all he had had to do was to go on with Tommy, and soon he would be back on his ship doing the things he was used to doing, and his life would be moving along at its usual pace. And now 60 and now. No, theoretically, he could also return to the albatross, unless, of course, it sank at all. But nothing will ever be the same, will it? Max said to himself as he stood under the deafeningly hot jets of the shower, washing off the dust in a vain attempt to wash away the fatigue and problems. Then he lay down, just for the 5 minutes he wanted. But when he woke up, he found that several hours had passed. There was a knock at the door. Another silent and tense servant announced that Mr. Gray was expecting a guest for dinner. It was only here that Max realized how hungry he was. The dining room, like everything in this house, was excessively luxurious. But when a steaming bowl of some stew appeared on the table in front of him, Max relaxed, paying all his attention to it. "Well, it's crocodile," Alex said. When the uninvited guest was ready to put the first bite in, the spoon clinked against his teeth and Max pushed it away carefully, as if it were poison. "I apologize for not warning you," Alex added. "Here's that dish." He nodded at the roasted slices of pinkish meat. "Antelope. Perhaps you're not used to exotic cuisine." "Yes, if I may," Max mumbled. His appetite was completely gone, but his stomach rumbled and he forced himself to eat, thinking about the fact that an antelope was almost like a cow. Nail and Angeli were here too. But contrary to Max's fears, no one brought up difficult topics and they talked about distracted subjects: the drought in the area, the construction of an airport in the nearest town, and Max's work already finished. My daughter answered the question about her studies at school. "I jumped 2 grades sometimes, so I'm already in college. Thanks to Alex for helping me keep up with everything and make the right choices." She sent the brunette such a smile that Max wanted to strangle him with his bare hands. "And that thing in the garden?" Max asked cautiously. It was, well, I didn't quite understand what it was. "Alex teaches me how to defend myself and deal with bad guys," Angeli giggled. "And even takes me to work sometimes." "Honey, what were we talking about?" I sighed. "Not at the table, please." "Angeli helps me to hunt poachers and smugglers. Africa is known to be rich in rare species of animals, birds, as well as diamonds." Alex said, as if nothing had happened, and Max thought that he was literally enjoying the expression, and it was. Because he suddenly realized that his daughter, in fact, still just a 16-year-old teenage girl, was being dragged along with this old man who looked like a negative character in an action movie to catch real poachers and smugglers. And they are armed and can do anything. It's kind of, Max hesitated. Dangerous? Well, I guess the moment when you could express your opinion about your daughter's upbringing is a bit lost. Alex grinned, and Max clenched his fists. Now he had no doubt. This guy was deliberately provoking him. "It's okay," Angeli said conciliatingly. "I'm fine. I like my life. And besides, I'm not always in business. We still travel a lot. Last month we went to India." "India?" Naili looked up from her plate. "I thought we were going to Tokyo." "Well," Angeli stretched out embarrassed, as if she'd been caught saying something she shouldn't have said. "We flew to India for a while too. Anyway, I like my life." She finished, giving the audience a radiant, wide smile, which can only be a teenager who believes that his life is just beginning, and there are a million opportunities in it. "Alex is helping me to become a strong, independent woman. Now I'm going to finish fashion college in London, and maybe I'll go into marine biology." "I see," Max nodded. "And on the personal front, I guess there are no shortage of boys. You've grown so beautiful, just like your mother." "Yes, I have admirers." Angeli laughed. "But Alex will kill them if they come near," she added more seriously and stopped smiling. "In general, the ideas of love and classical marriage are alien to me. I think it's better to have a free partnership to keep everything under control. In fact, I don't think I'll ever get married." Max swallowed hard. There was no doubt who was the main reason why her daughter had formed such views, and for the first time Max felt so keenly how much he had missed. Perhaps, no for sure, it was thanks to him that not only Naeli's personal life had collapsed, but his own daughter would not allow herself to be happy looking back on her mother's experience. After lunch, Angeli said she had to study and went to her room. Alex said he had some things to do too. "Oh, will you stay with me for a while?" Naeli asked, and it seemed that she was afraid of rejection. "Yes, of course," Mick answered. They moved to the terrace. "Another one," From here they had a view of some orange flower thickets that smelled spicy, thickly of sweetness. Max looked at Natalia without taking his eyes off her. She was so beautiful. The years of separation had changed her, but she was still beautiful. So you don't love him? What is love? She replied thoughtfully. If you mean that fire of feeling into which you step voluntarily, the one when you dissolve in another person, and it seems that every breath of air is sweeter beside him, then no. I do not, then it seemed to me that I could not feel anything else at all. No, don't say anything. She raised her hand and then clenched her fingers. She sighed a few times and unclenched them. It seemed to me that even my daughter is still more important than anything else in the world, but I'm not able to give her enough motherly love. And then Alex appeared. It was like he was leading me from darkness to light. And then when he said he wanted us to live together, wanted to help me raise my daughter, I said yes without thinking. He's not an easy man, but he's reliable. He's done for me. Nayli's lips touched with a melancholy smile. Everything. For some things, yes, doctors, no matter how much you pay them, are powerless. Nayli ran her palms down her legs, smoothing the light plaid blanket that covered her knees. But otherwise, Alex has become a whole world for me, for us. Even if I don't understand him somewhere, but I do. He is who he is and I accept him. My daughter has a future with him, and I would even be glad. Yes, I would be glad if one day he meets a woman so that they get married and all that. Since it didn't work out between us. I mean, everyone deserves love. But Alex, my Alex, he prefers solitude. Married, he says, to his job. And you, Nayli, finally took her eyes off the garden. Will you tell me about yourself? They talked. That day and the next few, Max talked to Nayli and Anjali, and they were striking contrasts. Nayli often fell into reminiscence. She even apologized again for telling her daughter for so many years that her father was dead. It seemed as if the past was still hurting Nayli, but she found the strength to let it go and forgive it. Almost everything. Anjali, on the other hand, she was talking to Max, but he quickly realized that the girl was doing it primarily for her mother's sake. Out of pity for her condition, giving an out of condescension to her illness. Anjali was certainly skilled at keeping up a conversation, perhaps on any topic, but sometimes it was impossible not to notice how slip in her speech those special notes that give away the head. A person can barely hold back, suppressing. Max did not hide from the fact that the bright sympathy Anjali felt for Alex Gray. At first, it seemed to him that he was jealous. But then he realized that he was even more hurt by the fact that Anjali seemed to listen to her mother less. Nayli was not an authority, not a source of wisdom, not a mentor. It was clear that Anjali still could not forgive her mother for this deception, this lie about her father. But Alex, who had supported this lie for years, seemed to be quickly forgiven. As for Mr. Gray himself, he played the role of a cordial host. Max could hang around the mansion. He was served by servants. He was a dear guest here. Alex made inquiries. The Albatross had safely reached one of the ports, and naturally, the captain and the whole crew were looking for their cook. Max talked on the phone with the bosun and someone else. He was told that in 2 days, sailing, and he was, of course, expected on board. And something told Max, no, he was sure of it, that Anjali would not keep them in touch, no matter how much he and Nayli wanted her to. In fact, the fact that Nayli had forgiven him was frightening, but he accepted the gift, timidly and not fully believing that it was real. Finally, it was no longer possible to delay his departure. Alex said he had urgent business, so one of the servants took Max to the city in a jeep. Another well-trained, silent type. In town, Max hesitated. How would he send word to Tommy? His rescuer had never shown up at Gray's mansion, and Max feared that Tommy had been insulted by his escape. But there was no time to go back. And where to find Tommy in the city, Max didn't know. That night, Max again tossed and turned without sleep. The sailing was scheduled for noon the next morning, but this, the last night he wanted to spend on the shore. He thought a lot again about the fact that the life of his girls, it turns out, was, although it is not a matter, of course, to drag a teenager on some missions to catch poachers and smugglers, that's enough. I have to sleep, or I'll burn the dinner and the crew will throw me overboard. Max said to himself and started counting sheep. It didn't help. But it turned out that there was at least one sheep in the room. What is that rustling and tapping? Max wanted to sit up on the bed and turn on the light, but he was suddenly pressed against the bed, and his mouth was clamped by someone's paw. Don't yell, Tommy said. Max's eyes widened, and he mumbled something unintelligible. We don't have much time. The room is bugged, Tommy hissed. I've got the jammer on, but there's exactly 4 minutes. We're leaving now. Trust me. Get up. He yanked him out of bed and dragged him to the balcony door. He swung it open, looked out, and dragged Max in. What's going on? Max started to say, but Tommy shouted so violently that he stopped talking. Climb over to the balcony of the next room. Then another one. Then, no. Max stammered because Tommy was dragging him to a narrow ledge from which it was clear it was easy to fall off and to the ground. You have to, Tommy said uncompromisingly. Otherwise you're dead. What are you talking about? Alex is watching you. He wants to make sure you get on the ship, get off, and stay out of trouble. There's 3 new people on the Albatross. If they suspect anything, you'll be thrown overboard. His goal is to make sure you don't understand or pose a threat. Or from what Tommy was saying, nothing was clear. Oh, wait. I'm not going anywhere with you. You are. Tommy said, and with a deft maneuver almost pushed Max on the ledge so that he had to spread himself on the wall like a gecko and somehow get to the window of the next room. It was empty. Come on. Tommy dragged him on. There was no sleep in any of his eyes now. They went out of the room into the corridor of the hotel, and then Max broke free. Look, are you crazy? What are you talking about? I'm not going anywhere with you. What the hell are you talking about? Nobody's going to take me, you idiot. Tommy growled, and then there was a stomp behind them. Great, because of your stupidity, we're screwed. And the next moment, confirming those words, several shots rang out in the corridor. They were aimed at his head. Max was shocked to see a piece of plaster knocked out of the wall at the level of his ear, and now Tommy didn't have to talk him out of it. He ran like a rabbit up the row and followed. Doors, stairs, back door, more stairs. Finally, we fell out. Get in here now. Some guy driving an SUV waved at them, and Max fishtailed into the back seat. Tommy jumped into the front seat. Then the doors slammed shut and the car sped off with a screech of tires. All right, said the guy behind the wheel. We're off. What took you so long? Can somebody tell me what's going on? Max looked out of the back seat. It's a long story, Tommy sighed, buckling his seatbelt. And I'm afraid you won't believe it. I don't know what to believe anymore. Ma, Max threw up his hands. But I was shot. We were shot. Why would Alex want to get rid of me? And stop. He yelled in the driver's ear so that he swore and swerved in surprise. If that's true, then Naili and my daughter, he's gonna hurt them. I have to get them out. Yeah, that's gonna be tough. The guy behind the wheel muttered. Take it easy, Tommy said sternly. Your folks are all right. Right now, but you're right. Alex Gray is not the man he wants to appear to be, and you're about to find out. The car stopped in front of an unremarkable building in a part of the city that, even with poor visibility, it was dense pre-dawn twilight, could be described by one apt word: slum. Max, Tommy and the driver, who introduced himself as Steve, entered the building. Max rounded his eyes because everything inside was different. The place looked like the kind of place that serious organizations are usually shown in Hollywood blockbusters. Lots of screens on the walls, people at computers doing something concentrated, someone explaining something to someone else, pointing an azure pointer at a map on the wall. Well, at last. The small company was met by a tall, swarthy man in a dark suit, one look at whom was enough to realize without any introduction. He is the boss here. My name is Richard Frank. He shook Max's hand. Glad Tommy was able to pick you up in time. So, I guess Richard must have gotten it from Max's face. I suppose you haven't been told much, and you need some clarification? Yes, please do. Max waved his hands. You know, I really don't understand what this is all about, but this Alex has my daughter and my ex hesitated. Let's sit down. Richard said, and pointed to a couple of chairs in front of the big screen. He took the remote control and pressed a few buttons. And I'll tell you everything. And then everything was like a bad fog for Max. and it seemed to him that it couldn't be worse than Richard had already said, but he kept adding and adding. It turned out that the problem of gem smuggling, illegal mining, and poaching was more acute in Africa than ever before. Governments were addressing them, as well as international organizations, notably Persephone, which Richard headed. He explained that they essentially exist on donations from individuals, as well as their own sources of income, in particular from playing on the stock exchange with securities, and the purpose of their existence is to fight this kind of crime. And a few years ago, they believed that Alex Gray was their ally, since he was also confronting these troubles. But then the truth came out. It was that some of the poachers and those who were illegally mining and selling diamonds were disappearing. It was as if these people managed to escape before they would have been brought to justice, except that there were still rumors that they didn't escape. They were helped to disappear, and not out of the goodness of their hearts. In the end, Persephone got to the truth. Alex Gray was not fighting against these criminals in the sense that would be good. He was only dealing with those who refused to pay tribute to some high-ranking people. In fact, he was eliminating the competitors of those diamond thieves and poachers who interfered with the business under his control. But for many people, Alex Gray continued to be a philanthropist, a good guy, someone who was ready to come to the rescue for the sake of poor animals. Max was shocked. Next to what kind of man his girls lived, but still, there was still a lot he couldn't fully understand. And moreover, he even began to think that maybe this Mr. Gray was a scoundrel, but he had good feelings for Nayeli and Angie. And Max shared these thoughts with Richard, Tommy, and Steve. They looked at each other. "Do you think we should tell him?" Steve muttered. You just... Tommy coughed awkwardly. Promise not to do anything stupid and hang in there, okay? We've got everything under control, okay? So, Max gave all three of them a hard stare. "Speak up," and Richard spoke. Alex Gray didn't come into this dirty business from the street. He was the successor of his uncle, John Gray, who was also Alex's guardian after he lost his parents as a teenager, about 2,000 years ago. John was diagnosed with an incurable disease. However, he could, in theory, live a long time, given strict medical supervision and specific treatment. Are you familiar with the theory that donors are much more accurately selected today than, say, 30 or 40 years ago? Richard asked. Max shook his head in the negative. He wasn't interested in such topics, but he'd heard about it in the news. In recent years, it's been common to use compatibility tests at the genetic level, he continued, and finally came to the nightmarish point. At the time when Nayeli had applied to the charity organization, their international database had all her data, her medical history, information about her body condition, and it just so happened that the database had been leaked. And this data was of interest to one medical organization, a closed one, intended only for elites. That's why an unknown benefactor paid for Nayeli's treatment abroad. Only after a series of additional tests, of which Nayeli, of course, had no idea, it became clear that she was not suitable as a donor. But those people found out that she had a daughter, and the picture for them was finalized. Just a daughter could be suitable for the intended terrible purposes. Alex Gray himself had never been seriously ill. He had come to the clinic only to charm Nayeli with his charm and become her savior. His task was to make this woman trust him with herself and her child. It wasn't to his advantage to make her completely healthy, Richard said. Max was shocked. It turned out that Nayeli could have walked on her own, but the doctors had deliberately operated on her so that she would be confined to a wheelchair forever, because that way she, helpless, was the most easily manipulated prey for Alex. He never loved her or even sympathized with her. He was only playing. But his most dreadful plans were for Angeli. John Gray's condition had at some point begun to require certain biological materials, blood plasma, bone marrow, and Angeli was the perfect donor for it all. Alex was a skillful manipulator, and he had convinced the thin 12-year-old Angeli that she should, out of a sense of kinship, agree to help John Gray. But Nayeli didn't know anything. Angeli thought that her mother was too weak of character. She couldn't be bothered and wouldn't understand such an important thing. Periodically, Alex and Angeli would get on a private plane and fly to one of the private clinics, to Switzerland, India, Chile. Max was breathing heavily. He was ready to run right now and fight with his bare hands against all the lions and crocodiles of Africa, not to mention the two Greys, but to save his daughter from this monster. Alex is treating her like a toy, Richard said. He teaches her, you saw it yourself. He pretends to be a good guy. I think he's attached to her, in his own way. But still, he never forgets what she is, a set of spare parts for his uncle. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Max asked. Because Richard's gaze had gone completely dark, the man tensed. Is there anything else I need to know? Unfortunately, yes, Richard sighed. John Gray's condition has deteriorated a lot lately. The doctor said that he will have another operation. It is scheduled in a few days. The doctors say that then he will live a few more years and your daughter will have to become a donor. No, donor of what? Max asked, feeling on the verge of fainting. She'll have to give John Gray her heart. Richard finished, as if he'd dropped the last stone on the pyramid where Max's hope for a happy ending rested. Not so long ago, when Max had been a peculiar visitor to Gray's house, he had often caught himself thinking that he wished he could find some flaw in the man. Well, let him not be so perfect. He gave Nayli flowers every day. He could chat with Angeli about outfits and typical girly gossip. He was so polite to the servants. He had a brilliant education, was rich, did charity work, martial arts, protected nature, just perfect. He was also handsome in the face. Anyway, I wanted to see his mask come off. And so it did. But it didn't bring any relief, and Max would give anything in the world for everything to stay the way it was. For Alex Gray to just turn out to be the cool and good guy that Nayli and Angeli had been so lucky to have. Then he, Max, would have been able to let his girls go, admitting his mistakes, his wrongdoings, and getting their forgiveness. They would have had different, no longer intersecting lives and destinies, and he would have, yes, he realized now, that would have been it, and there would have been nothing more to wish for. But the reality was different. Max clenched his eyes so tightly that colored spots flickered under his eyelids, and his brain began to scroll images even more vividly. He had heard Alex telling Angeli on the day of departure that they would soon fly to Australia with her, and the girl had thrown herself at the neck of that monster with a joyful squeal. She was delighted because she had long wanted to surf there and see the Great Barrier Reef. But it turns out that was a lie, because in spite of everything she'd been told, in spite of all her dedication, Angeli would certainly never have agreed to sacrifice her life for anything. So that's how Alex decided to lie to her until the end, to pretend to be her faithful, loving friend. I beg you, Alex exhaled. Tell me that something can be done. There is a plan. Richard nodded. What am I supposed to do? Nothing. The head of Persephone waved his hands. I don't want to offend, but you have no knowledge, no special training. All you can do is share with us information about what you saw and heard in Alex Gray's house, and then Tommy will take you to a safe place where you will wait while we do our job. After Alex Gray is arrested, your daughter and your ex-girlfriend will be safe as well. Max shook his head in agreement. What could he possibly object to? He really wasn't a fighter. He didn't know how to do anything at all. Cool, which could be useful for such an almost superhero organization. So he could only wait and hope for the best. So after thanking Richard and wishing him good luck from the bottom of his heart, Max, accompanied by Tomia, went outside and they got into the car. It had long since dawned and the city was in the usual heat of this time of year in Africa. I can't take it anymore. Tommy wiped his sweaty forehead with the palm of his hand. I'm going to get a cold soda. Do you want some? No, I don't want one, Max answered and stayed in the car. Tommy got out and headed toward a small store and disappeared into it. Suddenly, the cell phone he had left behind received a call. Max threw a confused look at the smartphone. It was Richard. He kept calling. Tommy was late. There must have been a line at the store. Deciding it was worth it to take the call and notify him that he'd stepped away, Max took the call. But he didn't have time to say a word. His consciousness was hit by what Richard was saying. The situation had changed. Alex and Angeli won't be leaving in 5 days as we thought. Maybe he sensed that something was amiss. He plans to leave today. A private airport. Richard named the location of this place. We need to change plans now. If he can get away in time, We need to get together and discuss a plan of action. Whether we try to take him now or try to intercept him at the destination." Richard didn't finish, but Max already understood. In this case, it looked like his daughter had less than 24 hours to live. "Tommy, are you listening?" Richard called out. Tommy, meanwhile, came out of the store and, loaded with bottles of ice-cold sodas and a large box of donuts, walked to the car. "Hey, stop," shouted Tommy and rushed to the car. The bottles shattered, the donuts rolled in multicolored rings on the hot asphalt, but he didn't have time. Max, pushing the gas pedal, went off at top speed and turned onto a parallel road. It led out of the city. They still had something to think and decide. Max gripped the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white. They were going to try. No, to think about it. To try to intercept him at his destination. And then what? Failure? And I'm sorry, but your daughter, Angeli. Max clenched his teeth so hard that they gritted and almost crumbled. "Hold on, my daughter. I will definitely save you." Angeli was surprised at the rush. When Alex suddenly said that they had to fly out immediately. "But I haven't even packed yet," she said. "And I haven't bought a swimsuit." "Everything you want. We'll buy you on the spot, doll." Alex grinned. "You'll have my pull." "Oh, really?" The young girl jumped happily and clapped her hands. "So come on, little girl." Gray smiled. "Yeah, say goodbye to your mom and come out. I'll be waiting for you in the car. I'll be right there." Angeli sped away, her red tail bouncing like a fox's fur in a velvet and pearl elastic band. Alex sighed heavily. He knew that one day it could happen, but he still hoped that it could be avoided. But the doctors were inexorable. John Gray needed a new heart, and he must have it. And if he had to choose between the girl he had grown attached to and the man who had replaced his father, he would make the right choice. Max drove down the road. The sun was blinding through the windshield. He drove forward through the clouds of dust flying out from under the wheels. The car was not easy. Tricked out with a lot of equipment. Several times from the speakers built into the dashboard began to sound the agitated voice of Richard, who demanded to stop. He said that they needed time, that they wouldn't let anything bad happen to Angeli, and that Alex would be detained in Sydney. That's where his father was supposed to have surgery. "Oh, you're a dead man if you do anything stupid," Richard sternly exhorted. "I don't care," Max shouted. "He has my daughter, and I'm not going to sit around and just wait for you to save her." Private territory. No entry allowed, and after a moment Max clenched his eyes and increased the gas. The powerful SUV crumpled the steel mesh fence like paper, entering the territory of the private airport. "Hey Alex, is everything all right?" Angeli looked anxiously at her patron and best friend, the man who had replaced her father. He was so strange today. "Yes, doll, everything's fine. I can't believe I'm going to see Australia." "Yeah," said Angeli, hoping to lighten the mood. "Oh, and we're going to the theater, aren't we? And the aquarium. I read it's the biggest in the world, right? And we can see kangaroos on safari." Alex almost groaned. What on earth is this? He used to think that if it was necessary to do such a thing, it would be easy. After all, the girl and her mother were just one of his projects. But now, "Bunny," he said suddenly, "there's been a change of plans. We're not going to Australia." "What?" Angeli's mouth dropped open. "But you said," "You see, while you were packing, I got a call from an old friend. We're going to Mexico. You're going to love it, I promise you. The legacy of the Mayan civilization and all that." "Hey," he turned to her and smiled, touching her cheek affectionately with his fingertips. "Chin up. You wanted an unforgettable vacation for a week, didn't you? Well, we'll have one. I promise." "Well," said Angeli, who was a little used to the fact that Alex could suddenly change plans and drag her into unbelievable stories. "Is the credit card offer still on the table?" She smiled. "Yes, doll, and how could it not be?" Alex said. A small private plane was already waiting for them. "That's all. Go up the ramp, sit in the leather seats and, Edward." Alex stared shocked at his father's right hand. It was a visibly balding and generally giving up every year. Edward still adjusted the cuffs of his custom-made shirt and rose wearily. "I'm sorry to see you under these circumstances. Alex, I'm sorry I have to be the one to bring you this bitter news. Your uncle passed away. This morning, the world spun before his eyes. Alex leaned his shoulder against the salon wall and inhaled deeply, convulsively. As if through absorbent cotton the words came. Acute heart attack. Doctors were powerless. Lawyers are already working on everything. You know, I always thought he was lucky to have you as a receiver, Edward said thoughtfully, his lips forming a wry smile that didn't fit the tragic situation. But to be let down like that, to change your flight path when you're expected somewhere else. Alex raised his head. He gathered himself in a flash. Yes, it's a blow, pain, but he can hold himself together. That's a lot of the reason why he's still alive. That's a lot of the reason he's reached his position. And now he realized the pilot and a couple of other people he thought were loyal to him were leaking information to the side. It's not nice to do that, Edward squinted, then fixed his gaze on Angela. Alex, what is he talking about? The girl who had tears in her eyes. She knew John Gray, too, and thought of him almost as her kind grandfather. Didn't know what was going on, but on some deep instinctive level she sensed something wrong. It's okay, doll. Alex put his hand on her shoulder. He too realized that something was wrong. To begin with, he should have been notified of John's death right away, which meant that Edward had been in on it. All he had to do was figure out what the purpose was. You're going to leave the plane now, Alex said evenly, but with a hidden threat. You're going to let us go, is that so? Edward grinned, and his gaze traveled over Angela in a predatory way that made her shiver as if he'd actually touched her. And let such excellent material go to waste. You know it's rare, don't you? Blood type, perfect health, high potential genetic code. I'm sorry, Alex, but I think the heart's going to a new buyer. Just like everything else that lies beneath that marvelous exterior. Alex, Angela became very scared. She clutched at Alex's arm. What is he talking about? And Edward, feeling like the master of the situation, with all the power suddenly concentrated in his hands, spoke. He told everything. Why Naeli had been chosen then, and that Alex had spent all those years just playing at being a family, and what he had to do now. But you're not as strong as John said you were, Edward said dismissively. Did you have a guilty conscience? You've decided to save the girl, haven't you? Why would you do that? She's not even related to you. Alex, tell me it's not true. Angela looked at him pleadingly. It is true, he answered quietly. But, the young girl gasped with excitement. Her whole world had turned upside down just now, and yet there was still something that held her. But you wanted to save me. You changed your mind. Yes, Alex nodded. I thought that John should find another heart, even if it wasn't as perfect, but not yours. How touching. Edward interrupted them with a murmuring, drooling Edward. But I'm afraid we don't have time for family sentimentality. The gun was in his hand. Get off the plane, Alex, and your little girl and I will fly to a place where she'll be waiting for us. The moments felt like an eternity. You know, I won't do that. Alex smiled with the corners of his lips. He stood so that Angela was over his shoulder. Edward, don't do anything stupid. I'm being followed, I know. Persephone came out at me and I wanted to. There was a gunshot. Alex didn't finish and began to slump to the floor. Angela, screaming, fell to her knees over him. Oh, what a shame, Edward grinned, lowering his hand from the gun. He was a promising guy. No, please don't die. Angela pressed her palm to the spot where the bullet had hit, but she knew it was the end. She was counting down the seconds. Angie, Alex called her by her diminutive name. I'm sorry. No, please save your strength. The girl smiled through her tears. I know, and I don't care who you were to others. You were everything to me. And I said so, I didn't say so. I should have called you that before. What? HAD, Alex did not say, but only moved his lips, but still found the strength to. Daddy, Angela touched his cheek with her palm. He covered her palm with his fingers. You are my real daddy, and I will always love you. Alex closed his eyes. He was out of this world. Angela threw her head back and screamed in a long, animalistic way. Tommy was a prudent guy and did not leave weapons in the car. So Max had to jump out of the car and run to the plane with bare hands, not counting the tire iron. He didn't think about what would happen if and when Alex's men met him at the airport. He didn't think about the fact that the chances of success in his adventure tends to below zero, and maybe it would be worth waiting. and so will not save his daughter and will die himself. Max didn't think about anything except to run faster. He saw the airplane ahead. The gangway was lowered, so he wasn't too late. Why? Angela, choking back tears, let go of Alex and slowly rose to her feet. The muzzle of the gun was practically against her chest. Why? Why did you do it? You stupid girl. You, Edward grinned predatorily. You. What could you possibly understand? Edward grimaced, and his free hand went to his heart. It tingled badly, and his breath caught. There was a strange, heavy weakness in his left arm. A thought flashed through my mind. It can't be. The doctor said that his heart was quite healthy. Yes, there were risks, but he was taking vitamins, and he tries not to abuse whiskey. And the fact that the day before, here, all morning he drank. So overexcited. It was the heat, Edward reassured himself, waiting for him to feel better. It was the damned heat, because it was scorching. Unusually scorching even for Africa. I hate you, damn you, Angela screamed. You're a monster, stupid girl. The hand with the gun trembled. Edward could barely recognize the objects in front of him. He leaned on the back of the chair. Max flew up the ramp. He almost fell down and looked under his feet. Shrieked. He saw Alex. However, his attention immediately turned to Angela and the guy with the gun. Who the hell are you? Edward snorted hoarsely, remembering that he had forgotten to take his usual heart medicine when he'd been drinking the morning's fine alcohol from Scotland. Oh, Angela. Max rushed to his daughter. Come on, more. What? Edward was not feeling well, but he staggered forward, shouting insults and promising to kill everyone here. Max was already pushing Angela out of the airplane when another shot rang out. It hit the target, but it wasn't Max. The bullet hit the open cockpit, where it struck the dashboard. What the hell are you doing? Screamed the pilot. He was a loyal man who had climbed aboard with Edward before Alex had arrived, but now he was in a hurry to get out of there because sparks were flying from the dashboard. It had shorted out and it was Sir, leave immediately. The pilot was almost another victim of the mad Edward, who was shooting everywhere he saw. Angela, Max, and the pilot jumped out of the plane. There was screaming and promises of a nightmare. Suddenly, cars drove into the private airport. The management of Persephone decided to take a risk and act in a hurry. This was greatly helped by Tommy, who said that he did not care that he violated all the instructions, but he was going to save Max and his daughter. Oh, Alex. Angela shrieked and ran back to the plane. Is he alive? Max asked, though judging by what he saw, it was unlikely. Angela did not answer, only cried again and fell to her knees exhaustedly. The girl was hysterical. She was now alone with her grief. She didn't want to see or hear anything around her. Are you all right? Richard flew up to the trio with a couple more of his agents as well as doctors. In addition to Persephone staff, local police and ambulances were also pulling into the airport. I'm not hurt, and I don't think she is either, Max replied. But there's a man on the airplane. He's understood, Richard nodded. Sir, the pilot said. There was a short circuit in the cockpit. I'm not sure what. Before he could finish, flames erupted behind the small group, like a volcano with dragon's breath, and the airplane exploded in the worst way. Alex's body, as well as Edward's, was gone. Daddy, Angela whispered, looking back. Max swallowed hard. He could have sworn he knew who the word was addressed to, and he knew it wasn't about it. In the meantime, the sun was still just rising, and it was noon. It was going to be a very long day for everyone. Max sat on the pavement and his hand rested on his daughter's shoulder. He didn't say anything to her yet. He was just there for her. He didn't know that soon. It would turn out that according to the current laws of this country, and another one, according to which Alex Gray was the second guardian of Angela. After her mother, Angela would receive all the riches that John Gray had once owned and that his only heir, Alex, should have received but didn't. Yes, some of this property was to be seized because, for example, many millions were obtained by criminal means, but a huge fortune belonged to legitimate businesses. Max didn't know that in less than a year Natalia would be cured and able to walk, nor did he know that Nayeli would confess to him that her feelings for him had not faded, and he would get a second chance. But already now he was beginning to guess, to feel, And just know that even when his daughter would find out about all the atrocities that Alex had committed, she would deny most of what she had felt for this man all her young life. But she would find the strength to forgive him and to keep a part of her love for him that even he, Max, the real father, could never eclipse.